Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the best games I've played in a while, and it's a solid 7 out of 10. Alright. I don't normally do numerical scores for games. I only landed on 7 in this case because I have 3 main problems with this game. But before we get all negative, let's try a little bit of positivity first. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a beautiful open-world sandbox set in 1899 in the American heartland and also Louisiana. You'll listen to an amazing video game score while playing out a free life in an open country. It's the type of game where if you get bored of hunting, you could instead go lose all your money gambling and then shoot the dealer because there's absolutely no way I haven't gotten a single tin card in 6 hands. It's a gorgeous game tying together a variety of biomes together fairly seamlessly, and it has a standard-setting attention to detail with stuff like the wind, temperature, the fact that the horse ball feels like a distinct creature that you're cooperating with, rather than simply a 4-legged motorcycle that extends player movement.
Hold up a second, folks.
I ain't stopping for no one!
Feed the horse, wash the horse, calm the horse down after you get attacked by a pack of wolves and it abandons you with only your revolvers. The player character has to eat as well, with a variety of foods that can be bought, caught, or hunted for and prepared in a variety of ways. Grind up some coffee and eat some minted moose before your long day of fighting law enforcement, and afterwards celebrate survival with whiskey and cigars, all with gameplay considerations, before remembering to clean and maintain your firearms and craft some explosive ammunition from the fat of that bear you killed the night prior. And there's a great deal of customization to your character, with mechanical implications to your mode of dress, and no, I was not aiming for a Calvin Candy look, I just like the drip. You'll need cold weather gear for like 3 areas where it gets cold, and you'll need clothes that can stand the heat pretty much everywhere else. You might get some comments about the blood on your hands from skinning deer unless you remember to take off your gloves before entering town. And your hair and beard grow out over time, so you have lots of options as to the style of outlaw you represent. Enough of this gay cowboy simulation. When are we gonna get to the real reason people want to play this game, huh? When are we going back to Blackwater? Fine. I tried to be positive, but the thing is that over the course of playing this game, I had a lot of time to reflect on its issues. I said the game has 3 main problems, and the first is this. Red Dead 2 feels like it was designed by 2 separate people, each with different priorities for what they want from an open-world game. Actually, it feels like it was developed by 1,000 different people, many of whom weren't getting adequate sleep, but that's a whole other thing. Point is, it feels like one person wants the game to be about the open world, and the other person wants to direct a television show but settled on a STEM degree. The problem is that one of those priorities helps the other feel great, but the relationship is parasitic. An amazing open world to set a series of linear gunfights in is great for those gunfights, but the television show aspect has zero respect for the open world, and in many ways actively impedes upon it. Example given. The linear structure of the game extends to its never-ending tutorial, which starts in the prologue and ends sometime in the epilogue, if ever. The game is very nervous about handing the player the reins, so it slow boils the mechanics first. However, it feels like there were multiple writing teams at Rockstar who are not answering each other's emails. What's the point of having a mandatory mission to introduce hunting and then an hour later having another mandatory mission to introduce hunting, when the mechanic in question wasn't even complex to necessitate all the hand-holding in the first place? But that's the less egregious part. It only gets worse when the game doesn't trust certain mechanics to the player until a set point in the story, like fishing. You can't fish in this game until you do the relevant mission, when, again, the mechanic in question wasn't even complex enough to, well, you get the picture. I literally haven't broken the fishing line once, so having multiple tutorials is unnecessary because the minigame is not difficult. There's a brief moment of smart design where Arthur, the player character, is teaching a kid named Jack how to fish. Arthur already knows how to fish. The player and Jack do not. It's a common way to tutorialize mechanics. I have the sneaking suspicion, however, that the designers were worried the player might try to fish before this point in the story, and so locked the mechanic off entirely to prevent the dissonance of earlier player character Arthur struggling to learn how to fish when story Arthur already should know how. It's not like Arthur doesn't have a pole and this is the mission where he unlocks one, like with the bow in the prologue. He manifests one as needed. I guess he just forgets about the concept until Abigail mentions it to him. I bring all this up because there's this idea where the player could just leave camp after the prologue and ignore the story. But that isn't really possible if stuff is gated behind story progression. There's a challenge where the player has to land a shot from 660 feet away with a long-scope rifle, but gun store owners won't actually sell a long-scope rifle to the player until the relevant mission where we need one, and then one is given to us for free. Actually, the game conditions the player to detest the idea of actually buying their firearms. Almost every time I did, I was punished by having a free version of that gun just given to me shortly after. I bought a Schofield revolver because I wanted a better sidearm, only to find one on a mission not an hour later. I bought a better repeater for fighting, a mission gave me one. I bought a rifle to use as a sniper, the game gave me one. But the messed up part is that this isn't a consistent rule. Not every gun is given to the player, but I just stopped gun shopping because the game kept punishing me for buying weapons. And the other aspect is the fact that the gun stores actually gate off buying almost every gun until certain points in the story. It's not like you could, on a repeat playthrough, use your knowledge of when a certain gun shows up to save up and buy it early. The point that you unlock the gun and the point that it's given to the player are always very close together, if not actually the same moment. The thing is, this seems like the main mode of player progression, getting money to get better weapons to do more damage to get more money. There isn't really much to spend your thousands of dollars on, which would be fine, I guess, if the main premise of the story wasn't about a gang's desperate need for money to escape their lives of crime.
We need more money. We've been on the run for months now, and I seen you killing folk in cold blood like you always told me not to.
It doesn't really feel like charity to give the homeless money when I have thousands of dollars that I could give them. The next problem is with the game's story. Red Dead Redemption 2 is about the Vanderlyn gang the player spends Red Dead Redemption 1 hunting down. Yeah, it's a prequel. Prequels can be done well, but anyways, the game starts with a lengthy prologue and a great looking part of the map that's extremely underutilized afterwards. It's not the kind of thing I would want to do twice. Indeed, I actually downloaded a save file starting after the prologue when I decided I wanted to keep playing after the epilogue. The thing is, after the prologue is chapter 2, but the prologue's so long that really it's just chapter 1, similar to how the epilogue is so long that really it's chapter 7. There are already some core problems here. First is the priority of the story. The prologue only establishes one of the many threats to the gang, the O'Driscolls, which is like saying the movie Joker establishes one of the main villains of Batman, which is random kids beating people up in alleyways. The core of the game really isn't about the conflict between Dutch and Colm O'Driscoll, it's just this recurring side plot that keeps popping up, like a television show with a rotating cast of guest stars. Oh sure, Colm O'Driscoll is core to the theme of the game, how destructive revenge can be, but that doesn't change the fact that the prologue implies the conflict is going to be much larger than it actually is. The prologue only pays lip service to the conflict of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and the Cornwall train robbery. And despite us asking, nobody really establishes what happened at Blackwater, but that's fine, you know? Blackwater was the moment that had to happen for this whole story to kick off. It's fine if you want to slow boil that particular information. But to me, a prologue should be establishing the characters of the story, or a microcosm of the broader game. Instead of a set of linear tutorials, the gang should set up camp in the ghost town, and then Arthur is set loose in this valley area with various missions in the area that he can do in the order he chooses, with the map being limited to this one part of the map. I really couldn't tell you who most of these characters were based just on the prologue, let alone the broader themes of the game. But fine. We get out of the prologue and into the game proper, except for the reasons I already mentioned. At this point, the story gets really disjointed and it's difficult for me to recall the exact order of events in the game. None of the chapters are really about anything. There isn't even equality in the length of the chapters. I think the best way to explain it is this. As the gang progresses to our new campsite, we spot some natives, who are characters we meet later in the story, except that is literally dozens of hours and several chapters away. Chapter 2 is about, establishing the gang and the mechanics of the game, I guess. So really, Chapter 2 is the actual introduction to Red Dead Redemption 2, and the prologue itself is fluff. And I'm not joking, Chapter 2 establishes the main threat to the gang, which are the Pinkertons.
All you people venerate savagery, and you will die. Savagely. All of you.
Oh, we're all gonna die, Agent.
Some of us sooner than others. Good day, Mr. Morgan.
You get more time to set up the characters, you have tutorials for most of the game's mechanics, it's in the actual open world, so it has some broader relevance to the overall game. It feels like both the prologue and the second chapter were actually competing versions of the tutorial, and it was decided that both should be kept. I don't believe anybody who makes the claim that content was actually cut. I mean, to be fair, we totally need the prologue so that we can establish that the first Redemption game protagonist, John Marston, is in this game and where he got his scars from. Chapter 2 has a lot of the players scoping out work, doing odd jobs, and trying to rebuild the gang from hard times. So then Chapter 3 is naturally the good times, the high point before the fall. It's not uncommon for people to suggest the player stop at some point in the middle of Chapter 3 to finish up their open world adventuring, which is alarming because Chapter 3 is in no way at all the middle of the story. See, the thing is, stuff starts to happen after this point that really pushes people towards ignoring the open world and finishing the story. Namely, the player catches a terminal illness. Yes, it happened again. It's not as bad as Cyberpunk 2077 because at least the player has time to do open world stuff before the disease, but this is something that really needs to stop. Having a terminal illness is antithetical to open world exploration, especially considering Arthur's Red Dead Redemption 2 is a key part of the game's ending. You know, how a doomed man decided to start righting wrongs before he died. Or, I guess, decided to accelerate his bad actions. Yeah, I'll scratch off getting good karma for the murder of your husband sometime between busting out all the poker players at Flatneck Station for Gambler Challenge whatever, and fishing for the legendary bluegill. Or bounty hunting. Oh, wait. They decided to make the bounty hunting missions story-focused content, which means there's only a finite number of them. I guess fuck everybody who liked doing them up until now. The real funny part is that the game has an honor system, which is just Dishonored 2's chaos system. You know, the one that is affected solely by the number of people you kill, and nothing else. Except there's technically infinite good people for the player to kill, so it has to be slightly modified to fit into an open world design. You can get good karma for helping people out, donating to the poor, throwing fish you catch back into the water, those kinds of memes. The thing is that pretty much every choice is presented as a binary. You either help someone out, or tell them to take an express train straight to hell. There's never really a reason not to help someone, but even that can't get you out of honor limbo. Instead, there's only one way to really start farming positive honor.
Ma'am?
Sure is pretty.
Hey there.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Wait.
Let's hope it continues. Hello,
Bye now.
gentlemen. You, mister, excuse me.
Good
Hey,
morning
folks.
to you.
Morning, sir.
Except remember that part?
You got tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Wait.
You, mister, excuse me. Hey, folks. Morning, sir.
Someone going around saying hi to every single person on the street is enough of a nuisance as is without the disease aspect. I don't understand how this is honorable. It's just more being popular. But how did I accrue so much negative honor? Well, this game has a really big problem, and that's with the law. It boggles the mind that a company that specializes in making crime games hasn't advanced beyond, just spawn more police officers. Rockstar should be leading the industry with their cutting-edge law enforcement systems. The open world designers are laser focused on delivering a dynamic world that they forgot the core of the game was about being an outlaw. So the systems around that should probably have taken priority. There's a couple different elements here. One are the witnesses who report your crime. However, they don't actually have to make it to a lawman. Instead, they simply have to reach the border of a circle of invisible lawmen that surrounds Arthur at all times and moves in perfect synchronicity with us. What? You can't prove they don't exist. The only time the witness system seems to work well is in towns, you know, the places where lawmen physically exist in the world and can be reported to. Witnesses are extremely unrelentingly stubborn, to the point that my modus operandi past a certain point was to just blow their brains out. The karma hit can be fixed in a minute just by being a TB super spreader in New Orleans. But the witnesses show up faster than they can be eliminated. Eventually, the player will have to leave an area. This seems like it would have an easy fix. If the player commits a crime, you should decrease the rate at which new AI comes riding down the road for a short while. I mean, I have so many variations of this story to tell that I have trouble picking just one. It goes something like this. A member of a gang tries to rob me. It ends badly for them. As I loot their bodies, a good Samaritan immediately comes riding up, then immediately hightails it in the opposite direction to report me for murder. 5 minutes later, and I'm running from the law with a maxed out bounty. Bounties aren't a terrible inconvenience, but the law is, because they don't relent. Once an area turns red, you either have to leave or play Bad Karma Horde mode. It's weird how coordinated these people are without radios. And killing lawmen is a negative honor action, so it's not like a Grand Theft Auto game where fighting the law is a primary side activity. Honor is a funny thing. Killing horses gives you negative honor, despite the fact that I often chose to do it as to at least create a chance of sparing the horse's rider. And getting negative honor for killing someone that is currently reloading after dumping an entire cylinder into you is a problem. Otherwise, it's mostly fine. It makes sense that the game should judge the player for dragging NPCs with the lasso to death or killing them with trains or burning them. The benefits of having positive honor are store discounts for stuff the player has more than ample money to buy. It's not like the ending changes based on honor. What, expecting a fake-out gag? The ending literally does not change beyond superficials. In one ending, Arthur's stabbed, in another he's shot, and in the third he dies on the spot of tuberculosis. The difference is honor and a single choice, but since the outcome is the same, I guess the preference is for the method. You know, in my personal opinion, I think getting shot is better than dying because you can no longer breathe. But I guess he got to see the pretty sunrise in the good ending. Anyways, the honor system continues to not matter and feel extremely arbitrary. The core and final problem is consistency, and boy does this game not have any. One of the events you'll encounter is an escaped prisoner. I ask him for details, but he doesn't elaborate. He just wants me to shoot his cuffs for free. No can do, partner. Bullets cost. Either pay me or tell me what crimes you committed, but I'm not a charity. I turn him into the sheriff, and there's even a small cash reward for doing it. Cool. Critical mistake. See, you can only do this with extremely specific NPCs. Run-of-the-mill gang members, robbers, even trying to bring the corpse of a guy who got kicked in the head by his own horse back to civilization so that they can have a funeral instead of being pulled apart by coyotes will net the player a bounty. Oh, and one time I went to turn in an escaped criminal, but he disappeared because the story decided that the sheriff's office was now a mission start point. Dead horse on the side of the road that you didn't even kill. Animal cruelty. Lassoing a guy who tried to steal your horse. Kidnapping. Worse than murder. And sometimes the missions force you to get bounties. I just wanted to unlock fishing for fuck's sake. Why are we killing all the lawmen in Strawberry? But see, the consistency thing goes a long way. You aren't guaranteed to have a horse after missions, but sometimes your horse will follow you through a hot air balloon ride across state lines and bodies of water. One of the first missions in Chapter 2 has you driving a wagon to Valentine, except you end up getting abandoned by the gang. Yeah, no thanks, I'm just carrying this team so hard, nobody else gets an assist, except Charles, I guess. There's a lot of missions that you think, oh, this is a Reverend Swanson, never mind. Dutch interjected and now it's his mission and Arthur's going to accept it for the player. After all, if you didn't want to do Dutch's mission, why did you start it? The missions are fairly consistent in length except for the chapter finales and one particular chapter that's really just in 1 hour's long mission, but there's zero signposting, ever, that a mission's actually going to be a chapter finale. If it feels like a plot point comes out of left field in this game, oftentimes that's because it does. Red Dead Redemption 1 was a lot better about this. You knew the sections of the game were going to neatly correspond with the missions to go after the Vanderlyn gang members, which was a much more coherent structuring device for an open world game. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I feel like the Gambler Challenge should be advanced every time I start a mission. There's not even consistency about whether or not each mission starts with the title and letterboxing by itself, or if you're told the name of the mission only after you finish it. Mission failed. You broke the law. Or how about this scenario? Guy makes an offer, tells me to follow him in an alley. Yeah, I've seen this movie before, let's do this. I'll quickly draw at the last second, hey Arthur, what are you doing? You're going too far in. Yeah, okay. I alt F4'd after this scenario. It was not about the money, considering they only stole half of it. It was about the fact that the game took control away from me to engineer this scenario into happening. The game does that a lot. Or how about the time a woman was trapped under her horse, but I fat-fingered the key to stop picking up the horse, and thus Arthur just permanently gave up. And then she got herself free. The game controls are context sensitive to minimize the number of keybinds you have to learn, or, make it playable on a controller. But that means you're prone to doing things you didn't intend because the prompt changed at the last possible second. Maybe hinging everything on fine positioning, but keeping the same dogshit third-person controls that has the fine motor control of a plastic bag tumbling down the street was not a good idea. Arthur's prone to keep walking forward a couple steps, turn dramatically, or I swear to God, run in circles, refusing to turn out until I physically stop. How are these movement controls Alright, let's stop there. I'd rather not get into the habit of asking how something is worse than Red Dead Redemption 1 because we'll be here a while listing out every mechanic that worked out better in that game. Okay, now follow me on the story here. I mean really, hold on to your seats. Dutch and Co., minus the two people in the gang with common sense, rob a ferry that's technically a big score, but obviously ends in a shootout so massive the town in question is locked down for an entire year. The gang flees into the mountains to shake their tail, which are the Pinkerton Detective Agency, as well as law enforcement of West Elizabeth. While in the mountains, the gang takes on the local branch of O'Driscolls, who are planning a heist on a train owned by Leviticus Cornwall. The heist works out for us, and the gang heads into New Hanover over the mountains. They do a variety of jobs while feeling they're increasingly being set up until Arthur's confronted by Agent Milton and Ross of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Realizing the walls are closing in, suddenly Leviticus Cornwall personally arrives in Valentine to confront Dutch, ending in a shootout with Cornwall's army of legal henchmen and the lawmen of Valentine. They head down to Lemoyne, ending up in a favorable arrangement with the local sheriff, a member of the Gray family who are at war with the local Braithwaite family. The gang tries to play both sides but ends up getting burned and loses a member, while the child of two members is kidnapped and sold to an Italian mobster. The gang burns down Braithwaite Manor and moves on to Saint Denis to get Jack back. Rather than the promised fate of Sicilian pederasty, Jack is instead treated very well because Bronte has some kind of thing going on with taking care of the lost boys of Saint Denis. I don't know, this plot point got dropped faster than all plans for single-player DLC. Italian mobster Shady and ends up burning the gang on a bad job, and the gang ends up shooting up his mansion and feeding him to an alligator, then trying to rob a bank before getting busted by Pinkertons. Hosea, one of the original gangsters with common sense, is executed in the street. Not sure about that one. John Marston gets pinched, Lenny's shot, Charles somehow escapes the city while the remainder hitch a ride on a ship that ends up sinking and the boys land on a Caribbean island. The island's main export is cane sugar, with a conflict going on between rebels and the local overseer that the gang is dragged into. Please submit your thesis on what the hell any of this has to do with the overarching message of the game, because to me it feels like an extremely out-of-place set piece. Arthur's taking things well, including his recent tuberculosis diagnosis that he doesn't really share with the gang, while Dutch is not. At this point, there's a big division in their relationship, with Arthur rescuing John in one of the most railroaded missions in the game, and this game has multiple train robberies. Dutch questions this because at this point he suspects John of being the problem, and then Dutch murders Cornwall. Sometime around here, the gang foils a plot to liberate Colm Driscoll from a hanging, resulting in his death. Then Dutch decides to start instigating a conflict between a local native tribe and the US Army because he has a plan, while Arthur goes against this plan and starts trying to save as many gang members from this self-destruction. One more job, remember the scene, Micah was a traitor all along, thanks for the subtlety on that one, Micah was glowing bright fucking green from the get-go. The gang falls apart, the Pinkertons storm the final campsite, Arthur dies, John and family fly, the epilogue has 2 chapters, Micah dies, Dutch's brain fries, remember your horse, now you cry.
Come on, brother. Let's go.
Give me a sec.
Come on. Push, Arthur.
Thank you.
The game's story is a mess. Sure, there's a lot of great set pieces there, and I'm sure I will be subjected to endless future video essays that cherry pick a bunch of favorites while ignoring the entire rest of the game's story's glaring flaws. Alright, let's start with this. The first game, or the first Redemption game, the antagonists were the members of the Vanderlyn gang, Bill Williamson, Javier Escuela, and Dutch himself. The problem is that between the 3 of them, they had like 20 minutes of scenes. So if we're doing a prequel, then obviously we're going to do some fleshing out of these characters, right? Well, Dutch has a lot of stuff in this game. Bill gets some stuff, but the game kind of makes a point that nobody likes Bill or takes him seriously, like when he tries to open up about being a veteran and is shot down. And then there's Javier, who I liked, but did not get a chance character-wise. Which is funny because of the 3, Javier was the weakest character in the first game. You know who does get an arc in this game? John Marston. You know, the protagonist of Red Dead Redemption and also this game after the epilogue? Yeah, John starts off as a very selfish individual, undergoes character growth, realizes that he needs to step up as a father, then as a husband, and has an entire character arc just in the epilogue where John has to confront the fact that he's always going to be an outlaw. So you took your chance to flesh out other characters and then gave it to the guy who already had an entire game's worth of characterization. Or you have cases where completely new characters are given an unusual amount of attention, key examples being Charles and Sadie, which are both characters I like, but that's kind of the problem. Sadie's entire ethos is revenge, which is kind of a massive issue in a game about how revenge is a bad idea.
I ain't got no lazy eye. No respect for the likes of you.
Well, maybe when your mother's finished mourning your father, I'll keep her in black on your behalf. You think on that, boy?
Well, maybe you shall, sir. And maybe other events will transpire.
You best stick to them books, because mark my words on this. Vengeance is an idiot's game.
Every time a character tries to get revenge, it ends up getting more people killed. Braithwaite, Bronte, Cornwall, Eagle Flies, even John Marston, when he kills Micah as revenge for Arthur, sets up the series of events that led to his own death. So Sadie being let off the hook without consequences is kind of interesting. What is it about this particular character that's different? Then you have Charles, who is only in the gang because of his mixed ancestry, which resulted in him being unwelcome in both cultures. And to be honest, it doesn't feel like he belongs in this game. Maybe the idea behind Charles is to show that if the gang had been true to Dutch's ideology, that things might have worked out, considering Charles also gets the good ending. Or is there some phenotypical aspect to this character that might have motivated the writers to spare him? Okay, so you have this chapter in Guarma that basically goes nowhere. Seems like a pretty good opportunity to really sell us on Javier, right? Who was the weakest of the three in the first game. Like, imagine for a second, the gang gets pulled into this resistance in order to get passage off the island. Most everyone isn't into it except Javier, who then makes Dutch realize that this is a validation of his ideology, and so he starts encouraging Javier, which ends up cementing his loyalty when the gang split. Bill Williamson should have probably gotten more use during the missions with the Native Americans. It would have been interesting to see Bill facing off against the army and siding with the natives, maybe showing that Bill may be working with Dutch currently, but showing the seeds that would lead to his departure. Or don't. Clearly people will eat up whatever you give them and call it a masterclass in storytelling. I mean, let's stop and consider for a moment. Instead of shooting up literally every town, what if instead the gang just made a hard push into Blackwater, took their lost money, and then split? Sure, that's Micah's idea, so it'll probably get people killed. But after the 37th story mission where I set the new record for most fatalities in a single robbery, that logic starts to rub real thin. Look, I really don't want to say this, so pretend I'm not the guy who made these videos. I think the problem is that the story is too long, and it's too much of a chaotic mess, and it steps all over the open world aspect of the game. And you might think like I did of just getting the story out of the way, but that honestly makes things worse. As much as I like John Marston, I didn't want to play the open world as him. But I had to, because even after all this time, Rockstar still hasn't learned that gating areas off through story progression is a bad idea, especially if one of the main side activities of hunting legendary critters has animals in West Elizabeth on the map that Arthur just doesn't get to do because the game spawns death squads of law enforcement, and even if the player is good enough to survive that, just has the player die of a heart attack if they go too far. The story has no focus. If the ride is bumpy, that's not good design. That's the screws coming loose and the roller coaster going off the rails. And I really want to drag this back to the open world. You made an open world game, and then decided a hyperlinear narrative was the way to go. This game's missions are already pretty infamous for how inflexible they are with how players complete them. Go to this exact spot, take out these enemies this exact way. You need the Carcano rifle for this mission, but we've locked it up to this point, so here's one for free because this is now a sniper mission. No, you can't stealthily kill people in this mission. That's not the intended way for it to progress. This prison break is supposed to go wrong. I think Rockstar needs to have some introspection after this game. My favorite mission would have to be the one where I'm tasked with stealing an oil wagon, but instead of stealing a specific oil wagon after going through a scripted sequence to get it, trading barbs with AI companions, I'm just told where two are, and if I'm attentive, I can notice that I have the choice of stealing one from the refinery or ambushing them on the road. The oil wagons can be seen going down the roads all through the game up to this point, and the player has all the tools to choose how to get it. Rockstar doesn't have to get rid of all the shooting galleries because they clearly like making them, but a lot more of the missions should work like this, because then it actually feels like I'm playing an open world game instead of a television series that keeps being rudely interrupted with horse rides between missions. And that's the three main problems I have with Red Dead Redemption 2, a split design focus, inconsistency, and the game's main story. There's a lot to say about a game that took 4 days of my life. It has really good combat and music, and a lot of the side content feels a lot more mature than past Rockstar titles. People complain about the realism elements like the long skinning animations, but I think it adds to the process. The open world really sells the idea of living a rough life out in the wilds. There's just something cinematic about this world. Like its frame rate. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening to my rambling presentation, and many thanks to the patrons who supported this bad behavior. I am glad I finally got to play this game. It was this or Death Stranding, and, well, Death Stranding didn't really sell itself to me. Patrons get to see the videos early and have their names in the credits, because I guess people like that. I'm probably going to start serious work on the Skyrim video in November, so October is currently the month where I'm trying to scratch some names off my list.
I'm gonna head back to camp. Okay, I'll catch you later then.
Sounds good.
All right, well, I should be getting on.